Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the Ma.K at YouTube with another build. I did a grip build for Gunpla Builders Australia. It had a couple of rules and restrictions that kind of hampered things and didn't seem too fun or interesting at first. SD kit, and you could only use one colour paint and shade it with black and white. The one colour being orange. Now, I was definitely not in the mood of doing an SD. Most likely would have gone for an older one with the newer ones that are all segmented and colour separated and whatnot. So, with a bit of arguing and negotiating, picked up an old kit. I had this bear guy laying around and decided to do a fairly extensive kit bash scratch build. Now, one of the items I brought back from Japan is an ultrasonic cutter. I shall be doing very extensive videos on it soon, but still learning, experimenting, and new to it. Small hobby-like blade, vibrates very fast, weird to hold, but cuts through plastic like a hot knife through Glad wrap or something. It's quite something. With this new toy, I was able to slice up the bear guy head into all sorts of interesting shapes with great ease, no saws, curvy areas, and start snapping, sticking, playing around the kit, forcing polycaps in where they should probably not belong, and attempted to build up a humanoid-like skeleton power suit for the size of a gashapon figure in an overly armoured mecha musume Mushin Krieger inspired build. It just sort of snapped together that way with playing and force dry fitting parts together to get some sort of concept. I had the rough idea what I was going for, though just testing pieces. Interestingly enough, the Gyan SD kit came with a couple of interesting weapons, the spearhead and the shield. I do like the bear guy head being a large helmet-like arrangement with the faceplate lifting up with hydraulics and whatnot. The rest of the body was fairly thick enough to accommodate what I wanted, and cutting the shoulders and the head of the figure and adding it on top would give an overall look that would be fairly achievable. Over time, bits like metal brass and further fine bits, putty, glue, super glue and whatnot just accumulated over time to shape and bear out what I was roughly going for. I didn't have a very clear image of what I wanted to look perfect at the end, but just improvising as I was scratch building was a absolute ton of fun and an activity that should be attempted from time to time. Once the frame was absolutely done and I knew where my articulation and connection points were, so the arms ultimately would not be too affected, the legs, the torso would be heavily played around with to make it look like a human body would fit inside. Using 2-part epoxy, I sculpted things around and just fattened and widened everything to appropriately look okay. The faceplate also had some putty applied to give off some sort of camera view, as well as a bit of putty underneath the figure itself to make sure it's a snug fit onto the body of the actual robot itself. Once that was done and finer details such as cannons and watch parts were attached to some areas, the majority of the bulk of the metal I decided to have a cast texture. So using squadron green putty, I applied putty across all those surfaces and heavily dabbed it with a Q-tip. Previously, I did try to smooth out and perfect the finish of the putty by putting a fill putty and sanding back. The top green putty is purely for texture, for paint to sit on. Once the squadron texture putty was applied and dabbed with a Q-tip, after a few days, it was very lightly sanded to get the sharp edges off for a texture look and not so much a I smeared putty on everything look. The head, the hydraulics, the cape and the faceplate was all magnetized, the cannon on the shoulder pinned, and everything was primed using Tamiya lacquer grey primer. Using the nail polish, I mixed a few batches of darker and lighter colours and applied the main orange on everything, and then shading at the top and the the appropriate amount of light and dark colours, as if light was hitting the subject and shading occurred all over the place. Decals were also applied all over the place, with a little bit of paint shaded on top for a weathered wear look. Other areas where I wanted colour separation, shading the tiniest amount of orange onto white, or darkening orange and painting black areas, as well as shading further with white and black, made quite a bit of contrast to have a break up to the figure to make it look like it wasn't a solid orange for a competition's sake, and it blended a bit more as its own original creation. The model was also heavily weathered, but not by one method of just heavy weathering. I applied many different layers and gradients of washes, including black, rusts and sand, quite heavily thinned, applied and sludged as appropriately, and other areas panel lined as appropriately. A few layers of matte coat was applied, and some pastel and pigment weathering occurred with MIG production pigment and Mr. Hobby products throughout the whole kit, where you'd see wear and tear or dirt collecting as usual. Everything was finished off with an appropriate amount of Tamiya acrylic matte clear applied over it. I also decided to make a diorama for this project, and this all started by 3D printing a fairly large platform with a backing. Now, this is where the ultrasonic cutter came heavy at play for practicing cutting out styrene. I drew all sorts of patterns and shapes that appeared to be interesting, traced them around with the vibrating knife very, very easily, as if I was drawing over drawn lines, and they were able to just snap out easily and clean up. I kept pushing and playing around with the ultrasonic cutter, creating the stairs and cutting out textured styrene for the brickwork around the place, and extra piping and plumbing all over the place to make some sort of back alley, plant room, sewage or factory like setting. Also, with what made sense to me, putty was applied to create textured like walls on some surfaces, checker plate styrene cut and glued on other surfaces such as the ground, and putty built up on the ground for some sort of soil muck, as well as wire meshing being added to places, solder with flux wire used to create leads, and chain on the side just to add extra bulk, interest and detail. Sand and PVA glue was applied on top of the soil-like surface and sprinkled to create ground gravel-like texture. This was all very playful and mucking around to make a fairly diverse and interesting base. Painting was straightforward, mostly airbrushed various shades of red for the brick, brown and greys for cementy areas or dirt areas. Few techniques of weathering, including a lot of sludge wash over all that texture that was employed. Decided I didn't like the stairs, got rid of that. After hand painted smaller detail, dry brushed some other areas, and then applied a few coats of matte acrylic. As there is quite a few faults in this build, far from perfect, I'm pretty pleased how it's come out, especially since it's an improvised kit bash scratch build and paint job, just mucking around and stretching out as I feel. It's definitely come out in my style and personal taste. It has come out quite dark. The shading and shadowing and weathering does bring out the grim and grime of it, as well as the proportions and even the lurching pose of the figure inside. The detail and the opening of the helmet is pretty interesting, as well as the collection and appeal of weapons, the combination, and the base rounding up the whole piece. It does tell quite an interesting story. I think it could stand alone and display quite interestingly in person at shows, displays, competitions. Looking back and how it stands from an SD Gundam modelling competition to something that turned into a mecha musume armour, it's probably almost 100% not too suitable to the attended group build. Nonetheless, I had an absolute ball, a lot of fun. It was a fantastic challenge, yet again being offered to build something at the same time as everyone else and just not being motivated or interested whatsoever. There's a few times that I did come across some brick walls building this where I had not a lot of inspiration because there wasn't an end image. The time limit did get me to trunch along with it. If it wasn't for that, it most likely would have been abandoned at some stage. Though nonetheless, very happy it's finished, very happy it's displayed and out there, and very happy to have this video out. I'm also very happy that this was also treated as a test bed for the combination of techniques, weathering, the use of the ultrasonic knife, just having a go at sculpting with putty and playing around, free shading with the airbrush, applying paint over decals for an appearance. All in all, very, very happy. That all aside, thank you very much for watching, and as always, until next time, stay tuned for further videos. If you have any questions, I'm very keen and active in the comment section. Check out Facebook and all that other social media jazz. Some interesting information in the description bar. Stay tuned for more interesting content. Catch you guys later.